Okay, so I've now switched so that you should be able to see both me as well as the first of the four articles I want to introduce to you. This one is by Cunningham and a whole bunch of colleagues. You'll see a whole bunch there. Um, and this one is in, this is the first of your two research articles. And when I say research articles, what I mean is that this article is intended to report the findings of a research study. Pedagogical articles may, in fact, report some research. And in fact, they sometimes are also reports of studies where that's really sort of framing the way the article is written. However, the audience for pedagogical articles is really targeted toward practicing teachers and teacher educators. So I guess when I'm saying research article and pedagogical article, I guess what I'm really saying is that the audience is intended to be different. And so you're going to find that the discourse in research articles is more intense, complex, researchy, for lack of a better term. Um, Whereas in pedagogical articles, you're going to have the text features may look a little bit different, things that are meant to pique your interest or insets meant to think about specifically about practice. And the voice of the author tends to be targeted to a little bit more of a broad audience or somebody who may not have a PhD or be, getting a doctorate or a graduate degree in literacy. So that's sort of the broad difference. So I'm going to start with the two research articles. So back to this one. This is investigating the instructional supportiveness of leveled texts. And I selected this one partly because I wanted a text that was really going to be focused toward the early elementary grades, and I guess all of the elementary grades when we're thinking very much about level and leveling of text. And what it's really meant to do, and you can see in the abstract here, that it's really meant to explore the use of leveled texts as a instructional approach or strategy or curricular approach, I guess, that was informed by reading recovery. And to really examine if the sort of broader use beyond reading recovery of level text really does have some positive effects in children's achievement. And I think that this article specifically doesn't necessarily look at reading as a whole, but at word level demands. So how children are able to sort of access text at increasing difficulties. So that's that one. I think this is a fairly old article, not too old, but maybe about a good 10 years old now. Yeah, it was published in 2005. This one is from Reading Research Quarterly. The next one is targeted, it's also a research article, and it's from the same journal, Reading Research Quarterly. This article in particular, called Rethinking Reading Comprehension Instruction, a comparison of instructional strategies for content and strategies approaches, really has had a major impact on me in my own work, because I've always taken a critical lens toward comprehension strategies instruction. I think it's often taken up in behaviorist ways. And I also know that it's sort of a sacred cow in the field. And what I mean by that is there are sort of a lot of dominant assumptions that, reading comprehension strategies are important to teach to improve reading comprehension. And this is a study that challenges that assumption. It sort of put some words to a few of the things that I had some critiques about. So I was really excited when I saw this come out. This is also old. It's 12 years old, but it's still very, very relevant. The target population, the participants in this study, I believe, were fifth graders. So we're sort of looking here at that upper intermediate and almost sort of into that middle level grade range. So I wanted to include something for that grade range in here. So I'm hoping that you'll find this of interest. So of the two research articles so far, one is really focused on leveling, which can be applied and considered both with respect to the theory, or sorry, the practices you're reading about in chapter 6, cracking the code, as well as chapter 7 on making meaning with texts. So let's take a look now at the pedagogical articles that I chose. The first one is by Tessa Daffern, and this is from the Reading Teacher, and it's called What Happens When a Teacher Uses Meta Language to Teach Spelling. So we've clearly got to focus here on cracking the code when we're thinking about spelling instruction. Full disclosure, I have not read this one yet, so I'm reading it along with you all. But I chose it because I was very interested in meta language. I've always been sort of a language geek, so I'm really interested in meta language, and I'm curious how this author is thinking about spelling instruction from a meta-linguistic perspective. Um, it's also looking at that intermediate into middle level range. So it's looking at spelling acquisition among almost 1,200 8 to 12-year-olds. Or actually, this paper was drawn from a study that included that many participants, and it focuses on I believe 16 teachers, or sorry, one teacher that was among 16 in a larger study. So that's one thing that you will see in many pedagogical articles, that they're reporting portions of data from a larger study. And so that's the case with this one. The Reading Teacher article, if you don't already know, tends to be geared toward the pre-K through grade 5 or 6 audience, sometimes including middle level. So the last article, and the second pedagogical article, is published in the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. And this is an article that is really focused on building background knowledge, rethinking text sets. And when you hear background knowledge, you may already be making some theoretical connections. But this is one that's really sort of an article that's introducing a quad text set framework and trying to build on multiple modes of text to really help students build background knowledge. And I think they make a lot of connections to disciplinary literacy here too, which will actually be one of our foci in a later unit, but not a problem there. Anyway, I wanted to include something that was geared, this journal is geared toward middle level and up, but primarily high school and adults. Yeah, so I thought this would round out sort of a span across the grade levels in what I'm hoping, in what I'm asking you guys to read about. So next, what I want to do is I want to just talk a little bit about some of the pre-reading and during reading strategies that I think may support you in reading these articles for this unit. Okay, so right now I'm actually in a sub-page of Unit 4 called Readings and Engagements, and you'll see a list of the readings for this unit, chapters 6 and 7, as well as the articles I just introduced you to. And you'll also see links so that you can download the PDFs right here. And right below that, I have some suggestions for reading, both pre-reading strategies and during reading strategies. Chances are these are familiar to you, and because much of what we are focusing on pedagogically in this unit is meaning making, I thought throwing in some strategies that are intended to support your meaning making would make sense. So again, some of these will be familiar to you, but perhaps not. So in terms of pre-reading, particularly, I think pre-reading strategies and using some intentional pre-reading strategies can be particularly helpful for those of you who are not used to reading some of these heavier research articles. So the two from Reading Research Quarterly. So getting in there and scanning the article headings, scanning the article for key terms related to theory that you may already be familiar with from part 1 of the book. You may find some explicit articulation of, in all 4 articles, of specific theories, so naming of theories like sociocultural theory or critical literacy theory or stage theories or something that may have informed the work. You may find those stated explicitly. You may just find words related to those theories, such as students' linguistic and cultural backgrounds is a concept that we often connect to sociocultural historical theory and sociolinguistic theory. So scanning for familiar terms. You can also scan the references list, see if there are names of theorists who were mentioned or who you read about in the first part of the course and in the first few chapters of the course text. For research articles, a strategy that I find really helpful is actually going in and reading the conclusion before I read the first part of the paper. It just gives me a framework for what it gives me some additional signposts. So in addition to the headings, it gives me an idea of what I'm going to be looking for when I read. It's sort of a big no-no when you're reading fiction, right? Because you don't want to spoil it. But I think it's a total, go for it strategy when we're reading complex informational texts, such as research articles. And that can also apply to the pedagogical articles too, although I think that those tend to be a little bit easier read, that the texts aren't quite as complex. I do think it can be helpful for the pedagogical ones to scan the insets, large font quotes, things like that, again, to give you a sense of what's to come. While you're reading, so I have some key questions for you to consider during reading. I'm not going to ask you to turn in any notes or anything like that, so you don't have to be explicitly writing responses to these questions. That said, if you do these, I'm hoping that it may help you draw connections and disconnections between some of what you're reading about in terms of research and theory, as well as helping you sort of identify theories or theoretical frames even when they're not explicitly stated, and also to think about what may be missing from these articles. Every single thing we read and write is written from a standpoint. It's written from a perspective whether we acknowledge it or not. And so I want us to be explicitly acknowledging that and to really think about, and this gets really at the final bullet point here, what's missing from the article in terms of theoretical insight? So what if the authors had taken a different theoretical angle when conducting their research or reading about, writing about certain pedagogies in the classroom? So I think that could be an interesting thing for us to consider. Got some engagements to partake in, which include the use of Flipgrid. So you'll be doing that, and I'm going to be engaging you with a policy document that you can jump into and sort of think about with respect to theories. And then you'll be engaging in your forums. So enjoy.